Hi, ladies. Welcome back to Flourish. It's so good to have you join us. Thank you so much for coming. I am excited to have Lisa Niswant back and Amy Bianchi Rossi back. Remember, Amy is a friend of mine. If you didn't get to hear her introduction last time, she's also happens to be a therapist.
Yay!
So we're thankful that she gets to join us. Last week, we got to sit with Norma again, and that was just such an awesome message about being anchored in joy. This week, I want to talk about something that actually brings me a lot of joy. I love connecting people. I just have said so many times that we're better together. So this week I really want to talk about connection and being anchored in connection. So I have some questions that I want to ask Amy. Lisa and I are going to just kind of jump in as we go along. And my first one is just, I know that connection is a huge part of what you do.
Right.
That's kind of, really the basis of all that you do, I'm sure. So from your research and also from your personal experience, can you share why connection is so important?
Well, connection, is vital. Just we know it from the word we're made in connection for connection, right? So that we are actually as part of God's creation, that we are all intertwined, right? We're intertwined with creation. We're intertwined with each other. That what everybody does impacts somebody else. That we don't operate in a vacuum in our life, and so connection is vital, and the health of connection is vital to be able to identify and do something with if it happens to be unhealthy. The other important aspect of connection is our connection with ourselves. What is our relationship with ourselves? What does it sound like? What does it feel like? And that is something that I don't think we talk about or think about very often. And then obviously we talk about, I know Stacy and Lisa and the leadership team talk about our connection with the Lord. And that is something that we talk about a lot, and that's great. That is a good thing. But connection has a whole lot of different levels and layers, and paying attention to all of those different layers is really important. And the two big ones that I deal with a lot is, first of all, connection with myself. What is, what does that sound like? What do I believe about myself, and how is that having an impact on my life? And then connection in my relationships. That could be marriage counseling, that could be with my kids, that could be with, my social circle or whatever. And how is that having an impact on my life? So connection's important.
Honestly, that is the foundation, our connection with ourselves.
Yeah.
I think that we don't really think about it that way too often.
Right.
I think we kind of look to our external connections and our external community when we think about that. But it's really interesting because really that is the root.
It is.
How we relate to ourselves is really going to affect every relationship that we have.
Exactly.
So that's really good. I want to also ask you, how does our view of God affect our relationships?
I think this is one of those things where it's such a big conversation that we can't see it all the time, or we're not aware of it all the time. I'll use the example of, you can't really grasp the edges of like the sky, because it's just so big and pervasive, and yet it's with us and we're aware of it, but it's just so everywhere that we don't identify it. And I think our relationship with God is the same way. I think that, over time, starting from our earliest teachings or input that we're given about who God is and what God is to our life, that we evolve and develop these beliefs about God and God's character, who I am in response to that, what it means to be good, what it means to be bad, lots and lots of things. And a lot of times we evolve with beliefs about God's character and who God is that are very unhealthy. And then those start to translate in the way that I believe about myself, and then how I then move through the world. And so all of these things are all connected. And that identity of my belief of the character of God and who God is a vital one to examine, and a tricky one to examine.
Yeah, you said something earlier when we were talking about this. You said that kind of in our Western mindset, that we kind of have this view of God that's transactional.
Yes.
Can you help us with that, understand that just a little bit?
Oh boy, and I'm out of my scope now. So just because this is me as a learner, because it's a lot of what in my faith journey and what I do, my faith and my belief system and who God is to me is a huge part of my life, and I invest a lot of time and energy in learning and growing, and asking new perspectives into my life to challenge mine. But that was one of the things that I learned, was that somewhere way back in the, I don't know, feudal times or whatever, that there was a shift in the way that Christianity looked and how God was positioned based on beliefs of, religious leaders at the time, or government leaders at the time. And all of a sudden this became this transactional: if you're good, then good things happen; if you're bad, bad things happen. So when you're a good kid, you get good things, and when you're a bad kid, you need to be better. And then we are in these broad categories, and it becomes black and white thinking. And so we can't be in both categories. We can either be in the good category or the bad category. And when we start thinking that way, there's always a bad category, but it then creates dissonance, or it creates conflict internally with our identity with God, because God doesn't have a bad category for us as human beings. And then how do we put that all together? Like, what do we do with that, right? So I have an idea of God loves everybody, right? All the people, all of his creation, and yet there's good and bad. And what do I do with that? So Western culture did that. And I think that's perpetuated a lot, and it creates a lot of conflict.
Yeah. And I think it goes back to what we talked about a couple weeks ago about how then we have two conflicting beliefs.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Because we look at someone like David in the Word, who the Bible says he's a man after God's own heart. But if we're looking at a transactional situation, David had some really messy things in his relationships, in his
bad choices.
Yes, he did some really ugly things.
The entire Old Testament is full of absolute screw-ups.
Right.
These people are a mess.
Yeah.
They're a mess. If you ever feel like, oh, God can't love me because I'm just not together, you just need to read the Old Testament. Pick a book, open the page, because it's messy.
Yeah.
And yet, in spite of David's absolute failure and mess and screw-upness, if that's a word, he was still a man after God's own heart.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think if we can look at that again in this transactional situation and say, gosh, God still loved him. God still used him. I think that can help us even to forgive the people in our lives that maybe aren't making choices that line up with what we think a good Christian, a good child, a good spouse should do, or even things that we do ourselves.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. One of the little tricks that I learned a long time ago is listening to how you talk about that. I made this, or I'm a good person, but I made that choice. And identifying how many times you use the word but and insert and.
Yeah.
I did this, and I'm a good person.
Yeah.
That person made a mistake, and they're loved by God.
Yeah.
That God's kingdom is an and kingdom.
Yes, that's so good.
He loves all of us, despite what we've done or whether we are in the Christianity club or not.
Right.
He loves them. He loves all of his creation. And so to be able to then look at our own stuff and say, okay, what am I doing with myself? And saying, am I compartmentalizing myself into good or bad, or people in my life into good or bad? And then maybe trying to insert and into that sometimes and see how that makes you feel.
That's good.
Might be challenging.
Yeah, no, it's really good. I have another question that I want to ask you. Okay. We know that relationships, that connection can be hard. And again, we already identified that one of the hardest ones is our connection with ourselves.
Right.
So I just want to ask, how does vulnerability and shame affect connection? How do those two players add to that hard, I guess?
Right. So if we think of vulnerability, and just as a shameless plug, Brené Brown is a rock star, so you can pick up almost any book or podcast of hers and be completely schooled on this stuff in a good way. So vulnerability is our ability or our willingness or both to be open and to be completely transparent about who we are and our beliefs and our value in ourselves and all of that kind of thing. And oftentimes being vulnerable is really difficult because we hold this knowing of ourselves as maybe we feel like we're a screw up, or we've made all these mistakes, or I'm not good enough, or beliefs like that. And so then asking us to be vulnerable with those types of things is asking a lot, right? It's asking us to stand before ourselves or God or people in our lives, knowing or believing that we're not good enough.
Yeah.
That's where the shame part is. So the vulnerable part is the transparency, is the openness that we are attempting to have in our relationships. Shame is the belief that we carry that keeps us from being vulnerable, or tries to keep us from being vulnerable. Because when we shame, so you probably all heard, shame is I am bad, guilt is I did bad. And so guilt is a fabulous emotion. We need it, right? It keeps us from making poor choices. Shame is identity based and goes to the very root of who I am, as my very being is not good. And so if that's and that's what shame is. It is I am bad. I am unworthy. I am not enough. And so if that's what I'm carrying, how then can I be vulnerable and open with people if that's what I'm going to be showing people, and they then might just validate that? They might just reinforce that belief. And so we often then won't be vulnerable when shame is at the root of our belief system.
Yeah, I think a lot of times too, some of the things that hold us back from being vulnerable is we think that we'll be more worthy of love and belonging if they see the snapshot of our lives. You know, we kind of live in this Instagram, Facebook culture where we kind of show our highlight reels. And I think that we know that messy behind those snapshots. So I think sometimes, you know, that comes into play in our relationships. Like, if they really know this side of me, they might not like me as well. Do you see that happen a lot? How does?
Well, and I think we all struggle with that, right? And the big answer, the big overarching answer is I belong to myself, right? I belong because I'm here. I belong because Psalm 139 says I was made in the secret place and then placed. That's why I belong, not because of what I did or what I didn't do or any of that. And belonging is something that we need to carry. And Brené Brown puts it really well. She says belonging isn't something we negotiate with the world.
Right.
And that's tricky because I think a lot of times when the world is giving us lots of kudos and lots of high fives and attagirls, then we feel like, oh, I belong, right? It's a slippery slope. And then when the world isn't doing that, we feel like we don't belong. And really all that was happening was when the world validated us, we felt like we were good. So it really wasn't us that felt like we belonged. It was because the world was saying that we belonged. So living that actual belonging, that I know that, you know, even if I'm not making great choices or, you know, I'm a work in progress and I know it, that I'm loved and I'm valuable and there's aspects of me that need to be here, right? If I believe that God is omniscient and he made me in the secret place and put me here, then I got a job to do, right? And so if I carry that and I recognize that part of my process, that order, disorder, reorder, that I'm going to have some messy stuff in there, then I can just kind of be that. And
That's okay.
Absolutely.
It's okay.
Right.
I love the phrase, oh, well. You know, it's like, oh, I did this thing and it was an abject failure. Oh, well. I cooked this meal and everybody hated it. Oh, well.
Oh, well.
Oh, well.
I mean, I think in all of life, we have to be willing to fail. And I think especially in relationships. We have to be willing to make mistakes and ask for forgiveness and be honest about it in our relationship with ourselves, in our relationship with God, in our relationships in our homes, with our friends, with our coworkers. You know, I think it's really a dangerous place that we found ourselves in, I think, as a country, when we've refused to admit some of the mistakes that we've made. I think that's why we've kind of ended up in some of the hard places that we've ended up in, because everybody wants to put on this face and not admit their failure. So I think really a beautiful part of connection is just, again, being vulnerable, admitting I blew it.
Yeah,
exactly.
Right.
We think about connection, like back in book club, we had this little conversation where we were talking about being smooth and shiny, right? So being like perfect. And you know, it might seem attractive, or that Instagram feed, right? The highlight reel. And that's where we're all striving to be externally. And yet when we think about connection has, like, we connect with the ratty edges, right? Like those, that's where the connection comes. And we can't connect with smooth and shiny. We can only, I want to be smooth and shiny, right? But I don't feel like I can meet you on, you know, your mistakes, or gosh, you feel that way too. Oh, I see you there, right? So that's that ragged edges that we can really connect on. And if we're not being open and vulnerable about those things, then how do we identify and validate and support and love and help our friends if we aren't able to just kind of.
And don't you feel like you're getting to a point in your life where you're like, I don't have time for fake anymore.
Yeah.
I just don't.
Yes.
And it's not even like an insult, but sometimes some of the relationships that I have, where they are has nothing to do with me, actually. It's more like they have let me in as far as we can go, or maybe I have let them in as far as I can go.
Yeah.
It doesn't, but it's okay.
Yeah,
It's like it's fine. But I do find that the older I get and the more self-aware I become and the more I am aware of who I am and comfortable with my own self and making peace with who I am, I have so much more grace for other people. It's like the grace that I have for myself, I am able to extend to the people around me. And so it's just kind of like a maturity thing where you get to a place where you're like, you're not together either. It's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll have grace for you.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's freeing.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah. And one of the things I was thinking about too, when you said, you can't attach to shiny, I think about even, we've talked about having different people in our lives in different stages, maybe a step ahead. If I'm having a parenting struggle, I don't want to go to the perfect parent.
Right.
I want to go to the other parent that's wrestled with some hard parenting issues that has kind of like put their feet in the mud, walked all the way through it and made it to the other side.
Right.
Yeah.
And all those things, same thing with marriage. I don't want to talk to a couple that's never been through a hard moment because I'm like, okay, that's not real.
Right.
Like that isn't marriage. I'm sorry. If you agree on everything always.
Right.
Then
So
either
I
you
want
don't know
people-
each other well enough, or it's a cult. You can't agree
they're
with somebody
really
about everything.
Yeah.
You can't.
Or they're good at the smooth and shiny.
Right.
They're almost,
And that's it.
Yeah.
If I've learned anything being in the business that I'm in, a lot of the smooth and shiny show up in my office.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of them.
Yeah.
And it's because they haven't been able to be real with themselves or, each other. And,
Right.
it's blown up. And,
Yeah.
And that becomes it becomes a problem. So,
Yeah. Okay, I want to ask another question. Is there something you wish more people understood about relationships?
They're hard. I think we all know that, though. The relationships are vital. I think this is something we didn't talk about earlier that that just kind of dawned on me is that relationships, I think we do better in relationships when we allow them to help us reflect on ourselves than when we have them highlighting what the other person is doing wrong.
Yeah.
And so when we come into a relationship and there's a difficulty, when we just have a litany or a list of how the other person isn't acting right, that is a huge clue about ourselves.
that's good.
And I think relationships have been, I know my marriage for sure has been one of the most amazing growth points. And I hated it for a lot of time. But my husband is exactly the person that I needed to highlight my growth areas. And I didn't like that. And I wanted him to change so I didn't have to look at that. If you could just do this, I wouldn't have to develop more patience, or I wouldn't have to broaden my awareness of what's important to other people, or, those types of things. And so relationships are about our own growth and grace building, right? You were talking about, I call it second half living.
Okay.
I can't even tell you how lovely at the 50s. Bring them on.
They're so great.
Love them, right?
Yeah.
Love them. I
Yeah.
don't care nearly as much.
Well,
as
it's like I
did.
thought I was mature 10 years ago. Yeah, no. I'm sorry. I apologize for when I was 40 for everything I said or did to you.
Right.
All the people.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
But I thought I was mature, and I was to a degree, but
Right.
yeah.
Based on the knowledge that you had then.
Right.
But again, the whole part of this group is that we want to continue to grow.
Right.
it.
And we have to go through some uncomfortable things so that we do continue to grow. And I love that. I love what you said about your husband, like that he was the biggest point of growth in your life. And I think my kids are that way for me. As teenagers, they can, I don't know, smell hypocrisy from 1,000 yards away. Like they can just say, your
Fake.
truth is not lining up
Right.
with what you're saying.
Yep.
And that is really hard, but again, it's an opportunity.
Yes.
It's an opportunity to grow, to be uncomfortable, to self-reflect
Yes.
and look at some of those areas. And I'm finding, again, that they're really helping me to be aware of things in my closet that I'm like, okay, yep, this doesn't fit anymore.
It's
This doesn't
humility
need to
building.
be
It
here.
is.
Parenting
Yeah.
is the most humbling,
Yeah.
humility
Yeah.
building experience, if we allow it to be.
Yes.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Sometimes I want it to be their fault, but it usually isn't. Is there a magic bullet that if we used it would improve our relationships.
There are no magic bullets. That is, I don't like definitive statements, but that's one.
Yeah.
That's just a hopeless journey. So if you're on one of those, let it go.
Yeah, I like that.
My visual on life's a puzzle. I like looking at life as a puzzle, and there's all kinds of different pieces, and it takes a long time to put the pieces together, right? We never ever get there, like we were talking about, our 40s, our 50s, they look different. They look better, we learn more, and no one piece is vital, but some pieces are important in the moment. And so when we can identify what are the different pieces that could use some work, and then pray about, God, where would you have me focus now? And how would you have me focus now on those pieces? That is a beautiful way to go through life, because I'm identifying, my physical self and my social self and my marriage self and my career self and my spirit, my spiritual self, all of those different aspects of who I am as pieces of my life. And it just takes the pressure off of there being one thing, because we almost always get to that one thing and then it's not better. Right. Or there's one more, So I like to look at that like, oh, these pieces are exciting, and I'm excited to see what the puzzle looks like here, but then there will be more. Right. And I'm equipped for that. Yeah. I'm equipped to lean into that discomfort. God's taught me, that was a hard lesson. That to really embrace discomfort in looking at those pieces.
But I think I like that you said God's taught me.
Yes.
To embrace
100%.
that and lean into the discomfort. Because I think sometimes we think that, well, I'm just not good at that.
Yes.
But you have to allow yourself to be taught to do that, to lean into that discomfort. Because none of us, honestly, by nature, like to be uncomfortable.
No.
Exactly.
And if we think that, okay, Amy, she's got it figured out, she knows how to be uncomfortable. No, it's something that we have to learn. And it's a process that I've been walking through lately. I haven't reached the 50s yet, so I'm still in that category that I'm like, I thought 30 was going to be it. I thought 40 was going to be it. But again, it's just this continual journey, this continual process that we're growing in wisdom, we're growing in grace for ourselves and for each other. Yes. So I just want to remind you again, connection is important. If it's not easy for you, if you're having a lot of chaos, maybe start with this relationship, because this relationship with yourself, the relationship that you have with God, they're so important. You are the one person that you're going to spend every moment of your life with. So make that relationship strong, because it's important. All right, I want to let you know, we're going to wrap up now. I want to let you know of something that's coming up on Thursday, March 25th. We're going to get together. All women are invited. If you haven't been able to join a Flourish group, that's okay. Join us on the 25th. We're going to meet at Living Word Christian Center in Brooklyn Park. We're going to meet at 7 p.m. in the fellowship hall. Again, all ladies are welcome. It doesn't age, demographic, working, non-working, it doesn't matter. If you're a woman, you're invited. We'd love to have you join us March 25th, 7 p.m., Fellowship Hall. Have fun in your groups. I hope you'll continue this conversation in your groups. There are a lot more verses. We only covered, I think, one this week. But again, it's all based on God's word. And we have a lot of verses that we're going to include for you. So we love you so much. Hope to see you next week.
Bye-bye.
Bye.